Welcome to another edition of the Hawk Off the Press podcast. I'm your host, Gazette Hawkeyes reporter, John Steppe. I am excited to be joined by Luke Mullin, the Husker football reporter for the Lincoln Journal-Star. Luke, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Short week, had this Black Friday game, but hey, still got time for a little podcast.
Yeah, and World Cup too. It's quite the sports week here.
That's right. I just got done watching that last game, so glad we're on the same wavelength there.
Well, first of all, it's been a while since Iowa has lost to Nebraska. Nebraska 3-8. Is there any extra kind of motivation that was clear when talking to Nebraska players here going into this rivalry game?
Yeah, definitely. For the in-state guys, for sure, the ones that have perhaps, grown up as Nebraska fans that have been, following the program for a little bit longer. And, for the guys, of course, the seniors, the veterans who've been, in the building for 5-6 years, whatever it may be, it was also a very big point of emphasis last week. The coaches were, saying, hey, you haven't beat Wisconsin since 2012. That was something they repeated all week. And it was close, but didn't really pan out. So I think this week, yes, it's part of the discussion, haven't beat them in a while. But I think the real motivation is they've kind of been trying to play up the spoiler role, ruin their season, really go out with a bang. That's been a little bit more, I think, of the discussion.
And it's interesting, Iowa fans are used to a very cautious approach in the transfer portal. One addition this past year with the transfer portal. It seems like Nebraska's been the complete opposite. How have all of these transfer portal pieces fit in?
Yeah, well, I think, honestly, the reason for that has been, the recruiting under Scott Frost, just a lot of misses, guys that didn't, translate to the field, didn't even, play, even, transferring out before they even got here. So there was that necessity to go and get pieces. And honestly, if you look at this year's Nebraska team, some of its most valuable players are the transfers, especially on offense. Casey Thompson, leading the way at quarterback. Trey Palmer has just been absolutely electric. And, Anthony Grant from the JUCO ranks, just guys that weren't on the team last year. So, yeah, it's been super important. And, forecasting to the future, regardless of who the coach is, it's going to be a very busy portal season for Nebraska. Yeah.
Keeps the reporters on their toes, too.
Definitely.
So for an Iowa fan who maybe hasn't seen a lot of Casey Thompson play this year in this Huskers system, what should they expect to see on Friday?
Yeah, he's not 100%. That's very much clear. He had some nerve damage. That was the issue. Got hit in the elbow. Couldn't feel his pinky for a while. Still, struggled to grip the football for a while. That was the issue, to get him throwing in practice. So they managed to accomplish that. I think last week had plenty of zip on the ball, but still bothering him a little bit. But in terms of his intelligence, he reads the game really well most of the time. Like many quarterbacks, he can be guilty of, trying to force a pass or, maybe misjudging something slightly, but he has a very good understanding what the defense is trying to do. Last week, he showed that he can scramble a little bit. That was something he hadn't done all year, but just because the defense was giving it, he cued in on that and picked up some yards in that regard, but pretty good arm strength, especially a little bit hit or miss with the deep ball to Trey Palmer. That's been the best weapon they had all year. Some underthrows, some overthrows, but meeting in the middle just enough. He's been a very, very solid piece for Nebraska.
And then running back, you were mentioning Grant earlier. It seems like Iowa fans have seen a mix of every kind of running back this season. What's kind of his style of play?
Yeah, no, he's got great, I think, moves, behind the line of scrimmage, but he gets himself into trouble, trying to do too much, cut back, create a new running lane as opposed to just taking, maybe the 2 or 3 yards that the defense gives him. He bursts quite a few big runs, 20, 30 yards early in the year. But, once you get into October, November, these stout Big Ten defenses, last week he had about 11 carries, 22 yards. Not a lot of room for him to run, try to exploit those cutback lanes, but great speed in the open field, pretty powerful when he does get it, a little bit of steam rolling up. He's been known to truck a defender every now and then, but when he's getting hit behind the line of scrimmage, it's the other team doing that trucking.
And then offensive line wise, how does Nebraska stack up this year?
Yeah, it's the definite weakness of this team. And it's really something that has been kind of a slide over a couple of years, you could say, just decreasing in the quality of the O linemen. And of course, as the Iowa program knows, I mean, you got to have those guys in for several years, learning the system, training, just such an important part of that offensive line play. And at the same time, injuries. Teddy Prohaska starting left tackle. He was out 3 games into the year. Actually, the planned right guard, Norden Newley, he was suspended before the season for a substance abuse policy, full year suspension. So he missed the whole year. It's really been kind of piecing together that offensive line. A couple guys who at the start of the year, didn't think they were going to be in the mix. They're in there now. And bits and pieces, they have, quarters where they pass protect very well, but that's the real weakness and not being able to just move that line of scrimmage up front.
And then on the flip side of things, it seems like a strength seems to be Nebraska's edge rushers.
Yeah, no, definitely. That was going into the year. That was the group that we expected to probably perform at the highest level. And, 3, 4, 5 games into the year, they really hadn't done much yet. And, it was a question of what can they do to get these guys going? Well, Bill Bush, he was the special teams coordinator, takes over as the defensive coordinator. I think you've seen a lot more 3 down lineman packages with the 2 edge rushers outside, giving those guys a little bit more room and, width off the edge too. But also, just better execution from the players. Garrett Nelson in particular, he was really frustrated early in the year not getting those sacks. He's come on strong. Caleb Tanner, veteran guy. He's a leader in that room. Production hasn't always been there, but he's flashed with a few big plays. And yeah, definitely the defensive line has improved a lot over the last few games, just in getting to the quarterback and making their life difficult.
And then how has this Nebraska defense looked in terms of their pass defense?
Yeah, it's been decent, but prone to a big play, prone to just a simple drag route, exposing them for 20, 30 yards. Just kind of those lapses that you see from teams, that are able to pick it up in pieces, but, consistently over the course of a game. It's been a little bit more of a struggle. I look at, freshman cornerback. We got a true freshman out there, Malcolm Hartzog, been very, very good, over the course of 50, 60 snaps over a game, but he seems to pretty consistently get beat for a 30-yard pass. He's not the tallest guy. So if quarterbacks are able to locate that, just one of those things where teams have been able to exploit a few of those weaknesses time over. But at the same time, not exactly getting gashed every week. And I think we can expect that not to be the case this week as well.
Not very often that you have a freshman leading the team in interceptions.
Yep, that's right. But he's been a playmaker. And, honestly, it was a case where at the beginning of the year, the guys ahead of him just didn't perform. And, that was a big thing. Mickey Joseph, when he took over as interim head coach, he's saying that next man up mentality. He's been saying that all year, compete for your spot, and Hartzog's play, earned him that on the field.
And then special teams last year was a little problematic for Nebraska. There was a lot of talk at Big Ten Media Days about shoring that up. Has that worked?
It certainly has. And, it's a credit both to the new personnel that they brought in, new kicker, new punter, guys entering the program, punters Brian Buschini and kickers Timmy Bleekrode, both been very, very solid. But also, to Bill Bush, I mentioned him a moment ago. He was working with those guys all off season. And then, of course, first few weeks of the year, he's very, very good at what he does. And I think they really managed to sort out that issue. But at the same time, a big, I guess, kind of kicking off, issue for Nebraska fans has been the punt returns. They just don't even attempt to return most of the time. Fair catch is the default. And then the kick returns, when they do choose to actually return it, usually falling short of the 25. So those areas, still a little bit of execution needed, but special teams a lot better this year, definitely.
And then it's always interesting when you see a mid-season coaching change, how much stays the same, how much is different. You were mentioning defensively having more of the 3 down lineman sets. How much of the Mickey Joseph Huskers look like the Scott Frost Huskers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, in terms of the X's and the O's, not a whole lot has changed. Mark Whipple, the offensive coordinator, he's really, taken a hold of that offense without Scott Frost, there to force more run plays. It's been a very pass heavy offense. That's Whipple's, desired way to run things. Defensively, there's been a few changes with Bush taking over for Eric Chenander. Some different things in practice too, but the biggest thing that anybody around the program can tell you is kind of the mentality has just changed with Joseph in charge. And, he's just been preaching accountability for everybody. And that was something I think that the locker room really struggled with under Frost. Just been trying to instill belief in these guys. And, when he succeeded in doing that early in the year, the 2-game winning streak over Indiana and Rutgers, I mean, the mood lift around the program was, something that it had been a long while since there'd been that optimism. Of course, you go through this losing skid, things are a little bit different, but the team recognizes it's been a long year, and they really are, behind Mickey, full support for that last game. They're ready to go out there and fight for him.
And then every interim coach position seems to be slightly different. Is this like a Jim Leonard situation where Mickey could be that next head coach, or is it a little more murkier, or is it more clear that they want to go on the outside?
Yeah, it's a little hard to tell because the coaching search, Nebraska hired national search committee. The plan was always to take a long-term look at this. When you fire a coach 3 games into the year, you do have that luxury of, having quite a lot of time to vet some different candidates, talk to a lot of different people. And I think the view of Trev Alberts was always, since Mickey is going to have these, 9 games to lead the program, what can he show? What improvements can he do? Obviously, it's difficult. And we've heard this a lot from Mickey in different press conferences. Like, he's been saying things, we can't trade players, we got to work with the personnel we've got. I mean, he's a recruiter. He's a guy who understands personnel and how Nebraska might be lacking against these Big Ten teams. So that's not on him. But at the same time, I mean, this is a very crucial hire for Nebraska with how many losing seasons they've endured in a row. The risk you run of, missing on another hire, continuing that run of just losing seasons. It's very crucially important. So Mickey may be part of the discussion, but my hunch is that Nebraska is more welcome to getting him back in that wide receiver coach's role than the permanent head coach position.
And then do you have a score prediction?
I do. Yeah. I'm thinking 23-13 Iowa, with the caveat that honestly that it could be difficult for Nebraska to get 3 different scoring opportunities. They only had 2 last week against Wisconsin. So really got to make the most of it when they get down there. I think, at the same time, Iowa defense, that they just play so well that, it might produce a turnover. You mentioned special teams from a Nebraska perspective, same thing, happens the other way too. So I get the hunch some big play like that'll go in Iowa's favor, and that'll just kind of snowball a little bit for Nebraska down the stretch.
I have 26-20 Iowa, and I'm not sure quite how I came up with 20 points for Nebraska. So we'll see. But
I think Trey Palmer, gets a big early touchdown, opens up the defense. It's possible, but we'll see.
Yeah, you think about it, and when Iowa gives up a couple big plays, things could happen. Yeah. Of course, that doesn't happen very often, but there seems to be something that's just fluky about these Iowa-Nebraska games that, okay, Nebraska can rattle off a couple scores, get a big lead, and then Iowa all of a sudden, like last year, makes the 3 big defensive or special teams plays that changes the game. So it seems to be the most competitive game between one program that could be winning back-to-back Big Ten West titles and another program that's trying not to go 3-9 in back-to-back years.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, even for all of Nebraska's deficiencies the last few seasons, they've made it a very, very competitive game. And, on that note, I will add it's kind of amusing, I guess, to see from over here on the Nebraska side of things, the full-blown panic that Iowa was going through early in the year with the performances, only to turn around in the end, fully guaranteed of a bowl game, top 25 ranking, competing for a division title. And Nebraska fans, I think they'd take that under any stretch of the imagination right now.
Nebraska fans would probably take Bo Pelini right now.
I think nobody wants him back, but they are yearning for those glory days, definitely.
Well, Luke, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely, yeah. Going to be a good matchup. Always interesting. Going to try to catch a little bit of that World Cup game, 2 hours beforehand, but always a fun time on Black Friday. So,
yeah, the wonderful thing of press box TVs. So
I know
it was great last week in Minneapolis when the Illinois-Michigan game was on, except for when I was crazy enough to go outside in the cold. So then I didn't have it, but we'll have that on, I'm sure. So yeah, it'll be a great sports day. And what could be a better way to wrap up that sports day than Iowa, Nebraska?
For sure.
Well, thanks to our listeners for tuning into another episode of the Hawk Off the Press podcast. I'll be back with another edition of Hawk Off the Press after the final score, after Friday's game. Until then, we will talk Hawks later.